Hi, this is Fran with Stampendous. It's time for our fabulous Friday fun of another watercolor class, and this one is 104, and the theme of it is taped edges. So we're now going to compare what we've done with the little vignettes to doing a taped edge, and I think it's a wonderful new look that you can achieve with all of your little watercolors. So we're using our Daniel Smith paints and our palette with all of the beautiful colors the way we've done on each one. And you can go back and look at some of those if you need some background. But we're getting started now, just stepping it up by introducing a taped edge. So as you can see here, these little vignettes are very interesting with an irregular outside shape to the painted area. And the torn edges, I think, make it look like these beautiful little decal edge of the watercolor paper if you had the capability of doing that in a small one. And so, but now on this one, you can see where we have a clean inside edge and then the torn frame around. So let's talk about how we can achieve that wonderful look. Here you can see a couple of different variations of the poppies with the beautiful fields in the background, and that nice clean edge and then that pop of white is just really nice. But as you can see on this one, my sizes weren't working that well to the standard size of the card, and so in class 103 we did reference an easy way to create some standard sizes. And I highly recommend that we start by a cut panel that's the size and proportion for the card. And you can see a bit more of this explanation on last class, where we took the full 9 by 12 page and got a yield of 5 nice panels to paint. And so let's talk about how we can achieve that going forward so that you can have a more uniform look to your cards. I've done the taped edges a lot of different ways, and I started out on a full sheet of the watercolor paper, and I simply went all around the perimeter with my basically 1-inch tape. And I'll reference this, that I prefer to use the neutral color of your cheapest masking tapes, and to switch to the blue tape, I think, is disturbing dark value to what I'm trying to paint. So I like that the regular masking tape is a neutral color, and it's very tacky. The blue is kind of a low tack, so you can actually see here that it looks a little bit funny because the best way to reduce the tackiness of the tape is simply to, I hold it up to fabric, and I had done these on my black slacks, and I just kind of blotted it a couple of times, and you can see a little bit of that. And now I have inexpensive low tack tape, and this will be important that when you go to remove the tape, it will come off without tearing the watercolor paper. However, in this case, when I did the whole sheet, I often got the inside strips of tape at an angle, and I don't know if you can see, but on this one, my line here is a bit crooked. And so I'm giving you some tips that will be easier than how I started out with this. And again, these were all irregular sizes, and so I've got a better idea for you going forward. And that is that we will start from these standardized pre-cut panel sizes. Here was a small one, and here was the larger one that would come all the way out like this. Now, if I'm going to tear the edge, I need to preserve some white for that. I need about 1/4 of an inch just to get a hold of it to do a nice tear without struggling. And so I'm starting with one of my larger panels, and Laura gave me the great idea here that if I were to use a grid like this of this cutting mat, this will give me an easy way to line up my tape. So I've torn some tape ahead, and I found that instead of doing this on my slacks, getting black lint on it, I can simply reduce the tackiness of it by doing it here on this cutting mat. So I put a couple of them on to test it, and now my objective is I'm finding an inside line left to right so that I can line up my tape and know that it is even all the way around the edges. Okay, so I've got another long one here, and I'm just working my way around. So if I do this a couple of times, this is just removing some of the tackiness of it. And over here, I'm trying to do it on the edge so that you can see when I paint it, and I hardly can find my little line up there, but you can work more in the center when you do it so that you can see. Okay, so since I now can press it down, now I have a panel that is going to, even when I tear the edges, it will give me a size that will work perfectly on my A2 card. I'm going to show you this beautiful little watercolor, and I like the small size of my painting, and I've made a positive template here that is 2 1/4 by 3, and I'm going to do this one all the way through for you to see. So I'm going to start from one of my smaller panels here that I had cut already. And okay, I'm finding a line on the right side and squaring it up with the line on the left. Okay, press that down. Blot another longer piece here. So this time I'm thinking now about that inside area, and I can line it up by that and or the grid. Okay. Blot this one. You may not be able to see, but you can hear it here. Okay. Sometimes you don't realize that your painting has gone skewed until you're trimming it at the end, and then you go, whoa, if I try to cut straight cuts for the edges, I'm crooked. So sometimes when that has happened, I have trimmed it away and cut right up to the painted area to square it off, and then mounted it on another color of white or something to frame it. But this method, if you have a cutting mat with a grid or anything else with the grid, this will give you some additional options of squaring everything off. Okay. Okay, I can press down the edges, and now that's ready to paint. Okay, so now I have my stamp on the handle. I'm using the VersaFine ink, and the raised ink pad makes it easy to move my large stamp across it, get it completely inked. And now I'm going to stamp on top of the tape. Press firmly. Okay. Move this out of the way. While that's getting a minute to dry, I'll just clean off my stamp with my wet wipes. That's where this VersaFine ink just works so well. Okay, and it dries pretty quickly. The next thing I discovered in doing my painting was that if I painted the foreground first, I didn't want to maybe ruin it by painting anything in the background. And so I highly recommend that we start by painting the purples that you see here in the background. And we're going to do that first. So, and you can really see here my swamp water is real swampy, but as long as my well water is clean, I don't need to go and replenish it. Sometimes when I contaminate my well water, I can dump it into the swamp and just add some more water into the smaller well. Okay, so I will get my brush wet to start with. I'll get a little test strip of scrap watercolor paper, and I had some purples and some beautiful lavender colors over here already, and this was from using the rose, which is in this pocket. It's also in each of these two pockets, along with here we have the marine blue, which I refer to as the outside blue, and the phthalo blue. And any combination that I mix in here, I'll take my damp brush, and if I want more of the rose, I dip to the back. More of the blue, which doesn't take much, I can dip to the front. And now I can create some puddles down here that give me these beautiful colors. And I can test and kind of see, by testing it, that's a really dark purple. And I want more of a light lavender here. So I'm going to actually clean my brush and see what we've got over here with this lavender color. Okay, that's looking much more like what I want. Okay, so I'm going to start. I have a nice little puddle of it so that I won't run out as I get started. And I might go darkest down here in this corner and then lighten up as I come around this side. Maybe I'll get a little bit of dark going up here. And again, I'm assuming my light source is from this side. So I'm going to get a little bit more water on my brush now, and before all of this dries, I will proceed from here, and now I can go all the way out and past that taped edge. If I want to lighten it up here, I get some of the paint off my brush and just do a light wash up there. Move this around. Lift some of that and add it up here, and it'll all blend in beautifully while it's still wet on wet. Okay. Now down here I went really quick, and I got this whole area of the vase with quite a dark purple. If I clean and dry my brush, I can use that mop-up technique to lift some of that away. However, if this area is really wet, it's going to tend to keep flowing right back into that area unless I also dry it a bit. But now it's light enough that I can work with that. Okay. So again, this area the background needs to dry before I can do that much work in the middle without it running together. But this is drying pretty quick, and I'm getting some interesting little puddling up here, but some of that just adds some interest. So we're going to let that continue drying. And I think I'll move on to my greens, since those are not touching that much of the purple area. And I'm going to revive my puddles with my needle tip. And let's get some more of the olivey green mixed here. Okay, and then we'll do a little bit more of this lighter green in case we want a little bit of each one. And I think dipping your brush back and forth into those greens is just going to make it look much more natural and interesting. So let's start with this green. Oh, that's nice. Okay, so, okay, that's looking very wet. So I need some more pigment. Go back into my pocket, mix some more, test it. Okay, that's now a drier. Oh, this is a nice, kind of a mossy green. So by mixing your greens, your work is going to be much more interesting and natural looking than if you were using one green out of the tube, whatever it might have been. And we'll do some more green down in here between the flowers. Okay, and that's kind of on the wet side, but it'll give me some interesting watermarks, I think. While that's drying, I'm going to proceed with some of the more magenta color bits of color on the flowers here. So again, I'm testing it to see, and that's looking like a nice soft kind of color. And I found when I was learning from some other videos that having the finished piece sitting there was very helpful. So wherever you might pause the video as you're watching or following along, you have that as a reference point. So I've added some pinks just kind of here and there. I'm just kind of looking at what worked on this other one that I liked so well. And we'll do some more along that line. Okay, and then maybe we'll go into a little bit deeper shade here. And again, by doing small little strokes here. Oh, I quite like those colors. And yet they're different from here. So yours too will be different each time you do it. Let's see, we'll just touch a little bit more. I'm going to the petals behind to darken what would be out of sight from a light source coming from over here. Okay, so now let's add a soft blue. And this, test here lets you see all these different colors together. And we're going to let them run together a little bit here. We're going to let it be watercolor. Let it move around a little bit. These two ran together quite a bit, so I'm going to mop up just a little bit there. Lift that away. So as you work with it each time, you'll kind of get your feel of how much pigment, how much water is on your brush. So let's do some work down here now. I think my green is dry enough. So I'm going to darken the vase on this side, darken it up here under the leaf, because you would have a shadow from that leaf. And then make sure that it's a little bit lighter here. Do kind of a light wash down here on the vase. I'm going to let that dry before I come in and paint the flowers. So let's see, I think we need a little bit more of the blues in our composition. It's okay to leave some white. It's going to just be little highlights. And if you think some of that blue is too dark, a damp brush will let you lift it away. In this one, I'm seeing my background is coming up lighter than my original one. So I will play off of that now with some little bits of darker color in my flowers, just for contrast. So that's where I think that background first is very helpful. If I were to go back and try to darken it now, I would get some more, even more irregular watermarks of how it's drying in that area. So I think instead we will add a little bit more interest of some darker values to our hydrangeas. Now I should wait for it to be completely dry before I remove the tape. And while the edges are drying, I think I might come back in with a little bit darker olive color here. Not too wet. So now if I add a little bit of shadow, yeah, very nice. That adds a nice little touch of detail there. Okay, and now for the reveal. I will carefully pull away the tape, and sometimes if it's catching or it looks like it's tearing your paper, just wiggle it back and forth and be careful with it. And there's a really nice clean edge. I pretty much use this tape only once, but I'm quite happy with my inexpensive manila color tape here. Okay, it's nice sometimes to have all that beautiful white to frame it, but in this case I got a little tear on that side, so it's just as well that I was planning to do a torn edge. So I'll show you here. I can get a hold of about 1/4 of an inch, and I'm barely dry, so I'm living dangerously here to proceed with this. But anyway, that shows you how easy it is to do a tear, leaving that beautiful white to frame your little miniature painting. And then you can be sure and sign it down here. I prefer to use a nice sharp pencil, and then you can sign in the white area if you want. And classically, things are framed with a larger area at the bottom of a painting. So if you want to leave a little bit wider white at the bottom, that will give you a little bit more of an area to sign and date your little miniature watercolor. Here are a couple of earlier ones that I painted, and this was one where I painted the flowers first, and then I struggled with all the greens around it, and I wasn't that happy with it. So that's why I strongly recommend do your like blue sky and your greens first, and then you can decide the intensity of the color of your flowers, kind of playing off of what you do in the background, and you can do several colors. I just wanted to show you these, and again, once you get that taped area and you stamp all your different images, paint all of that background area, and I just allowed the greens to mix into the purples and into the blues, and I was quite pleased with the soft colors and how they all blended together. And let all of those background colors dry completely. And in this one, I left a light area thinking that I might stamp a message up there. But if you're going to do that, I'd recommend you stamp the message first, because after you've painted all the rest of this, you're too afraid, even I, am too afraid to stamp the message in there and then not be happy with it. So stamp a message if you want, and then you can kind of keep that area lighter. But it's just so fun to create that taped edge, as you can see here. Now I'd like to show you how we're going to do a beautiful little seascape here of a night scene. And I've cut 2 small pieces, and I've put them flush together here. And we're going to do add one last piece of tape down the middle. And let's see, I don't mind it being a little bit more to the right. I can barely see my markings up here. It's trying too hard to work up into the corner so that you could see everything I'm doing here. Okay, so we'll press down the edges, and we've got 2 little panels. Next, I'm going to stamp my sailboats. Okay, and then I thought I would show you using my fine line masking fluid pen that we talked about in class 103 last week. We're going to test here. Okay, we want just a really fine bead, and I'm going to see if I can do a very delicate little moon up here. I can barely see the edge. Okay, and then we'll do some other little stars up here. Maybe we'll do Orion. That's the one constellation I can always spot in the sky. And a couple more little stars. The larger ones are going to look like planets. Okay, so that is going to need some time to dry, but while it's drying, I will show you a couple of tips about washes. Okay, it's much easier to keep this piece on the base when you're ready to feed that little needle that's in the cap into the wire. Okay, it only goes in one way. When it fits in, it slides all the way down. Okay, so cap it again when you're done. And now while the left side is drying, I will show you how we're going to do some washes over here on this side. The taped edges, I find, make it much easier to get an even gradient of color. On these vignettes I was struggling, and I had to keep going back and wetting the whole area again, and the taped edge does give you some advantage. So let's start out by creating some puddles of each of our colors and get them rather dark so that when we are ready for it, it's there and we can just dip our brush into it. So let's make sure we get a nice puddle of our marine blue over here. And again, just keep working paint into the brush so that your puddle is a nice deep value here. Okay. And I hate to lose all that blue, so I'm just going to clean it off over there. Next, I'll get some more of the phthalo blue, which is in this inside pocket. Oh, look at that beautiful, rich color. Okay, we'll kind of test and see how that looks. Okay, and then coming over here, if I want some rich purples, I'm using my rose, and this is the same phthalo blue. So let's see. Oh, isn't that rich, beautiful color. The Daniel Smith paints are just pure pigment, and it hardly takes any paint to get these rich, beautiful colors. And over here, I have more of the rose in this pocket with the marine blue, and that will give me another shade of rich purple. Okay, so I'm going to start with that one, and now I can completely move my brush left to right, coming all the way out to the edges of the tape. And even that, I need some darker color. I can see with the amount of water that I have that it's looking light, and so while it's all still wet, we'll just keep dipping into these puddles. Okay, and now I need some more of that rose, more of the magenta purpley color. And our colors should lighten coming down to the horizon. That was really dark. I didn't even test it, did I? So why should I be surprised? Okay, but now I'm going to get some of that paint off my brush and move it up to be a little bit lighter up here to the horizon. And since these sailboats in the dark would be more of a silhouette, I'm not going to paint around them. I'm just going to paint all the way through here. And now with that taped edge, I can sweep all the way across without a problem. We'll just kind of dance the brush around and see what sort of an interesting sky we get here. I have a hard time just doing bands of color. I'm always, you can work to get a perfect gradient of dark to lighter and lighter, and then maybe dark again down below here. But the colors are so fun and rich that I'm just going to keep moving them around and enjoy the randomness of the colors here. No two are alike in my book. Okay. Like I splashed a little bit. And those are still tacky, so I can't quite do the painting over it, but you can imagine now with that moon and the stars, once that's dry, I can do all this playing around with a really wet brush, and it's going to keep those, they're just going to pop at the end by being totally white. So anyway, you can have some fun trying out some little skylines that way in a dark sky. And again, remember that if you work small and you get the feel of it, then it's easier by the time you get to a larger panel. Here are a few more variations, and these with the taped edges, you can see how some different color schemes worked beautifully on this one. It's more forgiving to stick to a more monochromatic color scheme to start with just your blues and purples. And if you want to do lighter shades of color, that's very a nice look as well. And what we're going to do next, we'll kind of step into it so that you'll learn a couple more tips about how to work your colors from lights to darks in these more colorful ones. And this one you can see here, we did one little tree, and in this one I believe I painted my bands of color first and almost did like stripes of color. And then since the tree was going to be dark on top, I stamped that later and painted over it. And that worked quite well. So here are a couple of very dramatic little scenes that I did with the trees. And I think it just came out so fun. And on each one I learned something. So now I'm going to show you the easy way to do this. And we'll go from start to finish as best we can. The size of this one did not work very well with my A2 card. So I would strongly recommend our pre-planning that we did for this size panel. And I could have painted on this, but this area is still wet and drying and I don't want to disturb it. So I had an alternate thing that we're going to do here. And I set this up quite some time ago and I hadn't tried it yet. But this is just the cutest little clipboard and it's a very nice size to paint on. And I taped the edges with just a small edge of white. And we'll go ahead and work on this one now to create our little scene with the trees. Since I can keep it right in view for you. And I won't be getting in trouble with something that's still wet. Okay. I'm cleaning off a lot of excess ink that just might have been a problem. Okay, so I'm going to stamp 3 trees here, and I'm going to move them up toward the top edge of my tape. I'll stamp another one over here. But most compositions are more interesting if they're asymmetrical. So, and again, I've got a lot of ink on the edges. If you're not careful, that could get you into trouble. So clean it off with your wet wipe if you need to. And now these 2 trees, I'm going to stamp them just on top of each other. I don't need to mask in this case with the sticky notes because I'm going to paint them so dark it won't matter. Okay. I stamped the other little trees in the background on this one. But on this one, I'm just going to show you, if you have a fine line pen, this is an 05 micron, I'm just going to do a little wiggly line. You don't have to do a straight line. You don't want a perfectly straight line. Just continue that line so that you know that's your horizon line. Okay. We need to make sure this is dry. I've done it both ways. Sometimes I've painted my color washes first, and then you would at least just need to establish a horizon line. But in this case, we'll be painting across all of it. I'm testing that it's mostly dry. That could be a dangerous move. Okay, I've blotted it to test it with a clean, dry paper towel. And actually, now I need to get some of my puddles ready. My needle nose tip here will get some water in each of these colors. Okay, I'm going to start by reviving my darker colors. So here's my rose color, and I'll move over here to my scarlet, which is looking real watery, so I'm going to add some more pigment to that. My gamboge is next. So your puddles are areas to add water. Your pockets are an area to get the concentrated paint. And my yellow, again, I guard carefully so that I can always get a nice, clean, bright yellow in this section of my palette. Okay, and now we're going to start with that color and work our way back. So this is why I needed a horizon line to start with, and I'm going to imagine that this is sunrise with the sun coming up over this hill. So I'm going to start with my yellow down here to the horizon, come all the way across, and that will dry a little bit lighter. And I'm maybe going to mop up a little bit of color right through here to be the brightest area. And then I'm even going to do a wash of some yellow coming down into the foreground here. Okay. And then while this is still wet, I can come back in with my, actually that's skipping ahead to the scarlet. Let's bring in some of the gamboge next. And again, because that puddle is wet, these two colors are going to mix together beautifully. And you can see I'm painting all the way across the trees. That won't matter. The clean brush, I'm going to join these two. I don't want a watermark right there, so keep it wet. And now I'm going to add scarlet up here, wet on wet. You can see why you need those puddles ready so that as you begin to mix them in. And again, I could simply go for bands of color here, but you can make it more interesting if you're kind of up and down and the colors run together. Now I'm adding the rose up here at the top, and it's looking kind of washed out, so I'm getting it darker. You don't want the sky to look like it's on fire, but these colors will dry a little bit lighter. Okay, and it looks like my, I'm going to add some more scarlet. Woo, I didn't test it, did I? That's okay, it's all really wet, so I'm just going to move it around. And again, it would be a lot more work if I didn't have a taped edge and if I were trying to paint around the trees. But this way I can kind of just do washes all the way across. But I can see that I'm going to tip my clipboard up because the colors have gone all the way down, and this is darker than I want down here. So actually this is good that I get a chance to show you these other tips. So I'm using that mop-up technique with a damp, drier, cleaner brush, and I can brighten that skyline right there. And maybe I'll even lighten this a little bit. Okay, so now my color is going to be a little bit washed out up here. I think I'm going to go a little bit darker. To do that, I'm going to dip into a little bit of my magenta color, and that's going to tone down that rose anyway. And again, it's helpful if all of this is still wet, because now where it's drier, I'm going to see my brush strokes or get more of a watermark line. I'm still holding my clipboard at a little bit of an angle. I want a little bit darker up here at the top. Okay, and then with some clean water, I'm getting a funny mark in here, so I'm going to kind of just move my brush all the way around from side to side there. And lift a little bit more from here. I might even do it like a sunburst here of lightening the color right there. Okay, so while that's drying, let's talk about mixing our dark blacks and browns. So if you got our color wheel, you would have been amazed to see how the three warm colors when mixed together, gave me all these beautiful browns. And the three cool primary colors that you see here, when mixed together, gave me my grays to blacks and a whole array of beautiful dark colors. And we're going to need that now for our trees to look like they're a silhouette. So, and you know what, I'm looking at this over here and I'm seeing how more of my paint has come down to the horizon. And I'm going to mop up a little bit more of that with the clean, dry brush there. Okay. Okay, so I've put the three warm primaries over here in this area for my browns, and over here I have the marine, the Hansa Yellow Light, and the rose as the three cool colors. I'm going to revive this area and even get some more water down here into my little gutter. All of this paint will be revived again. It's really quite nice that when it dries, you haven't lost it. You can use it again. Okay, so now I'm beginning to swirl my wet brush around between this trio of colors here. If I go only between the red and the blue, what will I get? Purple. The opposite, the complement of purple, however, happens to be a yellow. So you bring this yellow in, and surprisingly, it sort of lightens it, but it neutralizes that color. And again, this just takes some practice and eyeballing it to see how much blue, how much red, how much yellow is going to get me to a really nice dark black, greenish color. I don't mind in this case it being sort of on the greenish side, but don't be afraid of bringing in that yellow. It's needed for these colors to neutralize and give you those gray blacks. And then I'm going to come back and make sure I have a good puddle of a very dark olivey color. So I'll start with my yellow here with the marine blue. Now that I'm looking at this, it's still damp, the paper's a little bit bubbly, but I'm not happy with that sky, and you maybe wouldn't be either. So we're going to paint over it again, and we'll just do it in fast forward. Okay, now we'll let that dry. If you're a crafter and have access to a heat tool, this is a great occasion to make use of it, and simply to speed dry the whole panel. So heating it, and now that it's dry, it's flat again, which makes it much easier to paint. And I have done a little bit more pre-mixing of some of my colors so that I have a nice dark olive here, and I've got some nice dark black colors that I mixed from the cool colors. Okay, so I need to see what's on my brush, and it's sort of a grayish green here. I'm going to start by laying in some green, the grass here, and I want to oh, that's good. This is kind of a nice mossy green color, and I might just do a sweep all the way across here to start with, and that yellow underneath just gives me a bit of highlight, and the taped edge makes it easy to get all the way across in some big strokes here. Next, I'm going to go to the really dark colors, and I'm going to actually lift some of this green and put it up here with my blackish brown. And it looks like I need even more of some olivey color. I need some real dark color here. There we go. Okay, so if my sun is coming up over the hill here, I might get some highlights on that inside edge of the tree. The darkest will be down the core. And again, I didn't test what was on my brush, but because it's so dark, I'm going to kind of do a core area first on each of the tree trunks. So now on this side, if my sun is here, I have some beautiful highlight on the inside of this tree, and we'll go darker to the outside edges. So with all this rich dark color, I will begin to dab it into all of these leaves of the tree here. And these trees were designed to have kind of windows through them where they're not just a big solid gumdrop, but they have some interesting openings which you can paint in or let that beautiful sunrise show through. And my brush has that nice little tip to it so that I can do those tiny little branches. And I don't want it to be a solid dark color, so I'm kind of moving around and adding a bit here and there to fill in. I'll lighten it a little bit, and that actually was quite wet, so I'm going to blot it a little bit so I don't lose control here. But look how that little bit, actually just kind of some water is moving it around. That's giving me a highlight on the tree trunk that is seeing the sunrise here. The next time you see a sunrise, you can study how the light is on the trees. Maybe we'll leave a little bit of lighter colors on the inside of the leaves. It just creates a very fun illusion, doesn't it? Okay, so now if our sun is here, we're going to have radiating light coming out each direction, and I'm going to darken a little bit more along here. And that's rather uneven there. Let me get back into my green a little bit and smooth that out with the actually that almost looks like a pathway there, so I'll just work with that. Maybe we'll lift a little bit of color along here. And the ground is not entirely perfectly flat, so if we make it too smooth, it won't look as natural as it will if we get some variation to it. Okay, we may be a little bit darker on this side. Now when I walk through the park and the sun is going down, I'm studying how the shadows of the trees look, and you begin to observe in a whole different way. Okay. I'm going to let that dry just a little bit, and now I want a much darker green. And I'm just going to work my way out at an angle like this, assuming that the sunlight is going to cast these shadows of the tree trunk. And I can make them very dramatic, and maybe we'll start to do some other little bits that would look like the tree branches shadows. You're just creating an illusion. And I think that works really fun. And the really darks on the tree really make it look interesting. And I noticed on this one, let me set it up here if I'm careful, I created a little bit more detail of a leafy look by getting some dark paint on my brush, but quite dry. And let's practice here, kind of getting, let's see, I need more paint and less water. Maybe get a bit of dark from up here. Okay, see if you can get the look of that on your scrap paper, and then try a little bit more of that to see if you can get some of those little tiny details of leafy bits here on your trees. Okay, I'm quite happy with that now. Remember, each time you try something like this, it's going to get to looking better and better. So my first one didn't look so hot either. But each time I do it, it just gets to be more and more fun. I'm probably rushing taking the tape off here, but I want you to see the reveal. That just came out so fun, and unfortunately I didn't press the tape down hard enough on that corner, and that has allowed some of the paint to come through. So I've got a couple of options. I might decide to trim the whole thing to the inside, or I can see if I can lift a little bit of this away. And to do that, I want a damp, clean brush. And if I work it a little bit more, I may be able to lift more of that away. Otherwise, you can decide in making your card that perhaps you bring another element of the card design in to cover that corner, but you've got options. So anyway, I hope doing the taped edge gives you a whole new, very fun way of working with your watercolors. So now you can see how using a taped edge gives you a beautiful look to your watercolors. And here I have the finished ones that we did. Once it's completely dry and the tape is still on it, you could carefully rub away the masking fluid that we had and see that beautiful moon and stars. And if you get some rough little edges by not pressing the tape all the way down, you can trim it away like I did on this one. I had a really rough edge, and so I just trimmed it away. So tape some edges and have some fun with some watercolor.